How does a suppressor work? Many people have seen scenes like this in movies. A character attaches a suppressor to the end of a gun, pulls the trigger, and all you hear is a gas-leaky quiet sound. But in reality, that's not what happens. Even with a suppressor attached, a gunshot is still very loud. It simply isn't quiet enough to go completely unnoticed, as movies often suggest. So how does a suppressor actually work? And what can it really do? Today, let's explore the science behind how suppressors reduce noise. First, we need to understand where the sound of a gunshot comes from. There are three main sources of noise. The first is the muzzle blast. This is the loud explosion produced when high-pressure gases rush out of the barrel. The second is the supersonic shock wave, created when a bullet travels faster than the speed of sound. The third is the mechanical noise, produced by the firearm itself, such as the movement of the bolt and other internal parts. A suppressor mainly reduces the first one, the muzzle blast. When a gun is fired, the propellant burns extremely rapidly and produces a large amount of hot and high-pressure gas, while the bullet is still traveling down the barrel. This gas is trapped inside a very small space under enormous pressure. The moment the bullet leaves the muzzle, that trapped gas suddenly escapes into the open air. As it bursts outward, it violently pushes the surrounding air, creating an intense pressure wave. That pressure wave is what we hear as the gunshot. In other words, both the amount of gas and the speed at which it is released affect the loudness of a gunshot. However, for a given cartridge, the most important factor is how quickly that high-pressure gas is released into the air. Think about a balloon. If you pop a balloon with a needle, all the air escapes almost instantly, producing a loud bang. But if you simply open the neck of the balloon and let the same amount of air escape slowly, it makes very little noise. The amount of air is exactly the same. The only difference is how long it takes to come out. The same principle applies to firearms. If the same amount of propellant gas is released over a longer period of time, the pressure changes become much more gradual, and the sound becomes significantly quieter. So how does a suppressor make that happen? Inside most suppressors are a series of baffles and expansion chambers. The bullet passes straight through the center, but the hot propellant gas does not. Instead, the gas repeatedly strikes the baffles, changes direction, and spreads into multiple chambers. Rather than escaping all at once, the gas expands inside one chamber, moves into the next, expands again, and repeats this process several times. What begins as one large mass of high-pressure gas is gradually divided into many smaller portions. As the gas expands, its pressure also decreases. But an even more important effect is that the gas takes much longer to leave the suppressor. Instead of one sudden burst, the gas is released gradually over time. In other words, a suppressor transforms one short, intense pressure pulse into many smaller, weaker pressure pulses. That is the fundamental principle behind how a suppressor reduces noise. If the bullet travels faster than the speed of sound, it continues to generate a supersonic shock wave throughout its flight. A suppressor cannot eliminate that sound. That's why truly quiet shooting usually requires subsonic ammunition, which stays below the speed of sound. Some specialized firearms also reduce mechanical noise. Instead of automatically cycling the action, they use manually operated mechanisms. Examples include the well rod and the high-standard HDM. Movies sometimes show people placing a pillow or even a plastic bottle over the muzzle to reduce the sound. In reality, that doesn't work. These objects cannot withstand the enormous pressure of expanding propellant gases, nor do they contain the carefully designed chambers needed to control the gas flow. Most would simply tear apart or be blown off, while doing very little to reduce the noise. If suppressors can't eliminate gunshots completely, why and when are they used? The biggest reason is that they significantly reduce the extremely loud muzzle blast, making it much harder for people farther away to detect the shooter's location. They also help protect hearing, especially during indoor shooting and close-quarters combat, where loud echoes can temporarily reduce hearing and interfere with communication. In other words, the purpose of a suppressor is to reduce the practical problems caused by an extremely loud gunshot. So let's summarize. A suppressor uses a series of baffles and expansion chambers to delay and spread out the release of high-pressure propellant gases. This turns one sudden, violent pressure change into many smaller and more gradual pressure changes. As a result, the muzzle blast becomes much quieter. That simple idea is what makes suppressors one of the most fascinating applications of fluid dynamics and acoustic engineering. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.